My name is Sean Lindsay, and I'm a graduate student here at the University of Central Florida. And today I'm going to be talking to you about virtual team skills and the importance of students learning those skills prior to entering the workforce. Our topic trend today is actually in support of the business administration and management track. And ultimately, we're seeing this phenomenon across the globe that is showing that virtual workers are being used more and more and more by organizations. And unfortunately, virtual teams do require certain skills to be successful. And many of those skills today are not being taught in the workforce or prior to students entering the workforce. During my research on this topic, I looked at a number of different scholarly articles, and I'd like to give you a high-level summary of each one. The first was by Markarius and Larson, and it talked about, the title was Changing the Perspective of Virtual Work, Building Virtual Intelligence at the Individual Level. Ultimately, what they looked at was a variety of different published articles from 2015 to 1984, about 300 in fact. And ultimately, they were looking at trying to understand what were the key skills that were most important for virtual workers to be successful. And the outcomes of that research is their ability to develop trust, inclusive information sharing, and an effective utilization of virtual technologies were the key outcomes. Another article by Snellman called Virtual Teams, Opportunities and Challenges for E-Leaders really focused on the competitive advantages that services companies get from the virtual workforce and some of the challenges that are faced by E-Leaders. But specifically, she came up with a number of different skills that leaders really need to be successful in leading virtual teams. A number of those include an ability to minimize uncertainty, encouraging virtual social activities, establishing clear communication, and utilization of effective technology. And finally, she also talked about the opportunities to learn about other cultures and celebrating differences, which can be a really key fact when you're building virtual teams across the globe. Another set of research by Alzane, Vasilech, and Inns was titled The Significance and Managerial Challenges of Virtual Team Working. They actually conducted literary research and did some qualitative and quantitative studies. And the outcomes, again, were quite similar in that they learned that trust and managing cultural differences were really two of the most important factors in leading virtual teams. Kestner, Larson, and Diaz actually have published what's called an applied approach to the teaching of virtual work skills within a business school curriculum. And actually quite interesting. I think it's at Northeastern University, and basically where they're trying to develop and incorporate into the business school class this notion of virtual, what the virtual worker skills are like. And they're developing a rubric of competencies which include things like digital understanding of technology, relationship development and maintenance, and choosing the right media when you're working in virtual teams. But it's showing the potential that students are leaving those classes actually more prepared as a potential virtual worker than when they entered. And finally, Owens and Kasachi have a study where they explored the impact of technology capabilities on trust in virtual teams, and ultimately what they were evaluating was what types of technology, did the type of technology they use influence the level of trust. And they did find some interesting things that certain types of technologies that were used did increase the level of trust versus some that did not increase level of trust in the managing and leading of virtual teams. We also looked at a number of other articles that are in the reference list at the end of the presentation, and I'll reference those along the way. Today, companies are trying to compete in a global economy, And in order to do that, they're leveraging this notion of a virtual workforce. And ultimately, it is increasing collaboration, allowing companies to be able to utilize their global workforce in a way that they've never been able to before. And it actually does decrease costs. With the advent of technology, so many different types of technologies that are available today that are being able to utilize to drive and this utilization of virtual workers, from video teleconferencing to cloud-based storage, online documentation. Half the world's population at this point ultimately have access to the internet. And there's a tremendous amount of evidence that shows a virtual workforce actually can increase employees' happiness, their ability to have a more flexible lifestyle, and be able to manage their time, not sitting in traffic. It actually increases overall productivity because of the increased collaboration, and it actually can increase loyalty, where companies are actually able to retain people for longer. One of the really interesting things that's happening also is that the virtual workforce is growing at a pretty rapid pace. And so when you start to look at where it was just back in 2013, they were saying roughly 20% of workers had worked virtually. Just a few years later, we're looking at about 40%. And even 1 year after that, there was one study that showed up to 90% almost of people have worked on a virtual team. As the virtual workforce grows, we are seeing, and the research actually supports, that there are very specific skills that are going to be required for a virtual worker to be more successful than someone who's not working virtually. And the research supports that the ability to utilize and choose and have strong efficacy with the proper virtual technologies is really important. And probably the number one is the ability to develop trusts so that you're able to develop strong relationships across the virtual medium. Matter of fact, one study did state that 54% by Al Zain said that trust is more important in a virtual team than a normal team, a non-virtual team. And this understanding of cultural differences becoming more and more important as we are in a global economy. So some of the other successful skills that our research shows are the ability to really have really strong and effective communication skills. Snellman also talks about this notion of having a e-leadership, an ability to support and create really strong relationships, setting great expectations and accountabilities across your team, without infringing upon kind of that level of trust that you want to establish. And Marcarius, talks about this virtual intelligence, which is sort of a combination of EQ and IQ. And the net from an issue standpoint, though, is that only 22% in a recent survey showed that workers are receiving training in these virtual skills. Therefore, how can our students be expected to be learning these skills, once they enter the workforce? And the intent would be that we have them start to learn some of these skills in the classroom. So the objective and benchmark that actually we want to establish for the curriculum is to challenge students and actually put them into a virtual world where they've got to utilize a variety of different virtual technologies to understand and demonstrate the ability to effectively communicate with and develop trusting relationships across a multicultural team. And the goal would be that they can do that with an 80% efficiency rating or better. So thank you for letting me take a few moments to talk to you about the importance of virtual team skills and educating our soon-to-be workforce about how to be more effective in that design, and look forward to building out a curriculum here that is going to support the education of those students to develop those virtual skills before they enter the workforce. Here's some of our references, additional reference list, and thank you very much.